With the 1.4 patch, one of the things that Massive wanted to achieve is more balance across the board when it comes down to the gear set items. Because of this, many of the gear sets have been given big adjustments or have even been reworked completely. And since a lot of people have been asking me the question of what to farm in 1.4 or what to go for in 1.4, I decided to take a look at all of these gear sets and build up a tier list of which gear sets I believe are going to be the strongest and which ones are going to be the weakest. Now, because I know that some people do not want to sit through a 25-minute video of me just talking about the new gear sets to get to the conclusion, here is the tier list that I put together. This is the conclusion, with the tier 1 sets being what I believe to be the strongest out there, and the tier 4 sets being the weakest. Also, if you would want to know why I ranked any particular set in a certain tier, and not lower or maybe higher, there's also a timestamp guide in the description which you can use to get to certain parts of the video where I talk about specific gear sets. And with that all being said and done, it's time to finally get into the video and go through all of these sets one by one. So, let's begin. I think there would be no better way to start this list than with the set that most players are probably still using to this day. And that is Sentry's Call. This set has been changed a little bit. The 2-piece bonus will now get you 30% extra accuracy, which I believe is pretty powerful, all things considered. The 3-piece for the Sentry is a flat 10% headshot damage, which can be a good pickup in combination with the Hunter's Fate 3-piece. The Hunter's Fate 3-piece gives you 20% extra headshot damage, so the combination of these two, that would give you a total of 30%. This can really help those shotgun builds in particular, as you get more accuracy and more optimal range with the 2 pieces of both sets. But outside of that particular combo, I have to say I'm not really a big fan of the 3-piece with the extra headshot damage. That is mainly because I feel like that Sentries will be more of a supporting set that either a healer or a tank will play instead of someone that's actually trying to deal the damage. Now, why do I think that this is going to be the case? Well, that's mainly because of the 4-piece bonus. The numbers on the 4-piece are simply too low to justify taking it for a dedicated damage dealer. It is 5% extra damage per mark instead of 15%. While I was over in Sweden, there was this idea to rework Sentries so that the marks would get stronger the more enemies you had marked at the same time. So let's say that you mark one enemy, then that enemy takes 5% extra damage, and then you mark 2 enemies, but then both of those take 10% extra damage. And it kinda just goes on like that. The more enemies you mark, the stronger the mark will get. I truly believe that something like that would have been very, very cool because it would change the way that you would have to play the game. As a Sentry player, it would no longer be your job to burst enemies down as fast as possible. It would be your job to put out as many headshots on as many different targets as fast as possible to provide your team with more damage on all of them. Obviously, some limitation needs to be set in place with this system, because otherwise you could maybe mark 20 NPCs and then you hit one mark on a player and he's just dead. Maybe a single target can only receive as much as 3 marks, so the damage never gets higher than 15% per target. But as long as you already have 3 of those targets marked, your following targets will instantly receive all those 3 marks as well. Especially now that the maximum is 15%, I don't think that that would be overpowered at all. Just an idea that I wanted to get out there. Overall, I think Sentries is pretty solid, although I wouldn't really place it at the top of my list. Next up, we're going to talk about my old friends, Tactician's Authority. Most of you playing on the PTS would have probably already noticed that Tactician's Authority has received a lot of big changes, and most of you would probably say that with those, the whole set has become a lot less powerful. The 2-piece has 10% skill haste on it now, the 3-piece has 10% extra skill power, and the 4-piece has been reworked. Instead of getting 1% extra skill power per 60,000 damage done by your group, you will now get 0.2% extra skill power per bullet. It also doesn't cap out at 100% anymore. The cap is now 30%, and if you reach that 30%, the whole bonus will disappear after 10 seconds regardless if you're still hitting enemies or not. Now that's, I know what it sounds like at first. I know what I thought when I first saw it, and I didn't really like it either. I thought that the set was useless, but after testing and playing with it a little bit, I actually do not think that that is the case at all. What a lot of people are missing out on here is that first up, the set will also be very effective in PvP right now, because it's no longer about the damage that your group does, it's about landing bullets. So even if you're hitting somebody for only 500 damage, because maybe he has that survivor link and you're not doing that much damage anyway, it will still count towards your stacks. And second up, and this is also pretty important, There's no longer a passive decay on this bonus anymore. Previously, you would all remember that you would lose 1% for every second that your group didn't deal at 60,000 damage. But right now, the bonus stays passively for 10 seconds, even if you're not hitting anything. And then after those 10 seconds, it's brought back to 0 immediately. And while yes, if nothing's going on, and nobody is landing a single bullet, then you're gonna lose your mech stacks faster than before. But we also all know that in PvP, if both teams want to fight, your group is pretty much guaranteed to land at least one bullet on any player or any NPC every 10 seconds. So getting the bonus up in PvP is going to be a lot easier. What probably turns a lot of people off from this set though is that the bonus is removed regardless if your team is landing any bullets when you reach max stacks. They're feeling like, what's the point of getting your stacks up when the game takes them away after 10 seconds anyway? So I'm gonna go ahead and explain to you why I believe that they did this. I didn't get official confirmation from the developers, but this is what I think was going on. The reason why they did this is probably because they didn't want the 4-piece to flat out give 30% extra skill power in prolonged fights. Because that would seem to be a bit too strong in comparison to all the changes that were made to the rest of the game in terms of skills not being kept anymore and that sort of thing. With the way that tacticians work right now, they want players to use skills at the right moment when they have their stacks up to then get the full effect of the 4-piece bonus. So if you manage to use your skills at the right time, then you will get effect out of this. Otherwise, not so much. And I think that I can agree with this. I can agree with the fact that players shouldn't be able to have those maximum stacks all the time. That wasn't the case with Tactician's Authority in PvP earlier, in 1.3, and that shouldn't be the case now. However, just because I think that this is a good idea, that this is a good mechanic, that doesn't mean that I think Tacticians is in a great spot right now. As I said, I like the idea, I like the concept, and I like how it works. It is all very nice. But what I'd still like to see, in terms of changes to Tacticians, is some very small number increases to make this set on par with the rest. Right now, it takes 150 bullets from your squad to get it to max stacks, and then it only sits there for about 10 seconds. I think the uptime of this is a little bit too low. I would say either lower the amount of bullets to get it to the maximum stacks to something like 120 bullets, or let the max stack sit there for a little bit longer for a duration of maybe 15 seconds so players have a bit more time to actually drop down their skills and wait for their cooldowns to be back up. As I said, Tacticians, I really like the design right now. I'm probably gonna try it out, but some very small tweaks and number changes would do a lot of good for this set. Then we get the Strikers, and this is a bit of a weird one, I must say, because unlike most of the other 4-piece bonuses of the gear sets, this one seems to be completely unaffected by all the changes. It still works in the exact same way. Every bullet that you land still gives you 1% more damage, all the way up to 100%, but then every miss, that will take off 2% of your bonus. What this means is that at full stacks, Striker's Battlegear will give you by far the most damage output in the game. But to get the stacks up that far, that is a near impossible task, at least in PvP. The 2- and 3-piece bonuses also seem to be more targeted towards PvE content, with the stability making it easier to precisely land bullets and the armor damage putting an extra dent in elites and bosses. So I think that if we see players using this set at all, it will be players playing on the PC platform where it is easier to hit those targets because of the mouse and keyboard. And also we see players mostly using this in PvE situations. For example, players that play a lot of incursions, they might find a lot of use out of this. In the first couple of weeks of the PTS, the Nomad set was definitely a strong contender to be a tier 2 or even a tier 1 gear set. This was mainly because of the 4-piece, because that gives you a second health bar every 4 minutes, but also because of the fact that the Nomad 2-piece was now 20% held on kill, and that NPCs died a lot faster on the PTS, so that held on kill became a lot stronger. The set provided 20% held on kill on the 2-piece, a passive health regeneration on the 3-piece, even while in combat. And as I said, it gives you a full health bar if you take fatal damage, and that can happen once every 4 minutes. But now that we have arrived at week 4 of the PTS, held on kill rolls on gear and the Nomad 2-piece went through quite some changes. For starters, held on kill that rolls on gear now only rolls in 4%. That's a very big nerf compared to the 12 to 13% that it was in the live game. And the held on kill on the 2-piece Nomad has also been reduced from 20% to 15%. This does make the 2-piece Nomad stronger in comparison to what you can roll on the gear, but that doesn't take away the fact that the 2-piece Nomad received a 25% nerf and thus is a little bit less effective. Also, part of the reason that held on kill from the Nomad was so strong is because you could stack it with a lot of other held on kill rolls on your gear. But that has also sort of been taken away because you only get 4% per roll on your gear. The 3-piece bonus for the Nomad that was already quite underwhelming from the start because yes, it does provide the player with a passive healing amount at all costs, even when you're taking damage. But the healing amount is so small, it's so little, that it feels like almost nothing happens. I can barely even see my health bar going up. So with all these changes, the one thing that is still pretty strong about the Nomad is the 4-piece. Having a full extra health bar on a 4-minute cooldown, that's still very nice to have, but it is, in my opinion, also a very selfish set, so to speak, and within a group, it just doesn't add the same punch or the same utility as some of the other sets do. So for all those reasons combined, I truly believe that the Nomad now has fallen back to being a tier 3 set. Then it's time to look at the gear sets that were introduced in a 1.2 patch a long time ago. First on the list is another one of my old friends, Final Measure. This set to me was previously only really useful because of its 2-piece. Basically, you run with this and you will not be dying to those one-shot sticky bombs anymore. And on top of that, you will be a lot more resistant versus any other exotic type of damage, such as those big flamethrowers or explosive bullets. This 2-piece has been brought down to 25% exotic damage resilience instead of 50, which kinda hurts the set a lot. But since the armor caps are now harder to reach, you will probably always want to roll armor on the knee pads. So the only place where you're actually gonna get that exotic damage resilience is on the body armor, because you have two major attributes right there. Because of that, exotic damage resilience is a lot harder to come by, and thus running with the 2-piece may not always be a bad idea. The 3-piece would be very nice if protection from elites wasn't capped at 20%. You know, if the cap wasn't that low, you could really push a PvE orientated build or even utilize protection from elites to walk past landmarks without dying on a manhunt. But since the cap on protection from elites is at that 20%, this will never really do too much for the player, and thus I will always keep suggesting to spec into something else if possible. The 4-piece is something that I do not find helpful at all. It allows you to defuse an incoming grenade, basically making it so that it doesn't explode, and then adding that grenade to your inventory. And although this may sound nice on paper, 9 out of 10 times it is completely possible for any player to actually dodge a grenade or a mortar shot or anything like that. And the one time where you and your friends are sitting on smart cover in the incursion, mortar shots and grenades usually come in pairs of 2, 3 or 4 at the same time. And then, yes, you're going to defuse one grenade, but then the rest will still hit your squad. In PvP, the 4-piece is super easy to counter as well. You and your team can just throw 2 grenades about 2 seconds apart, and then yes, the guy with the final measure will defuse the first grenade, but then 2 seconds later they're forced to move out of cover anyway. You see where I'm going at here, right? The set is not very useful. I believe that it would be best if you could just absorb every grenade that lands under your feet. This way it actually has some sort of impact on how your team can play and how other players have to play against you. I don't think that that would be too powerful. It's not like you're suddenly immune to bullets and you're giving up a whole lot of other powerful 4-pieces to be able to do that. With how Final Measure is right now, I'm probably going to run around with a 2-piece in my backpack without actually equipping it. And then when I come across that one guy still running around with a sticky bomb in the dark zone, I'll give up whatever other 2-piece I got equipped, and then I use the 2-piece Final Measure to counter his sticky, so to speak. But that's really the only scenario where I can see myself actually using Final Measure in the next patch. And then we arrive at Predator's Mark. Over the course of the 3 weeks that the PTS lasted, this set and how the bleed works, that has been changed up a lot of times. There was a lot of back and forth with the set, so to speak. At the start of the PTS, it was a definitive tier 1 set for sure. That was because suddenly, for some reason, the first aid did not remove the negative status effects anymore. Then, the developers reduced the 4-piece bonus from 100% extra bleed damage to 50%. To kinda balance that out, but it still felt so strong. Thus, the set remained tier 1. Later down the line in the PTS, however, the first aid change was reverted back. And now, once again, the first aid does remove negative status effects. Even with that in mind, even after that change, I still believe that Predator's Mark is a top tier set, simply because of how the first aid has been changed at its core. Yes, people can cleanse away the bleed now, but it's very easy to reapply the bleed as well. You just have to land 10 bullets on the same guy and then he has to wait for his first aid to be back up before he can cleanse himself. Remember guys, you cannot walk in and out of the same first aid anymore. Well, you can, but it's not gonna heal you or cleanse you for a second time. On top of that, the 2 and the 3-piece for Predator's Mark are also very nice to have. The 3-piece synergizes well with the 4-piece, as Predator's Mark users will most of the time lean towards using assault rifles or SMGs simply because those have the highest rate of fire. Having an 8% extra damage on those, that does make the weapon a lot stronger, but it also boosts the damage from the bleed. And a 10% extra reload speed is also quite a good addition and can be used for any other build as well. Of course, do not forget that outside of PvP, in PvE, the NPCs cannot cleanse away your bleed, so the 50% extra damage from the bleed, that's pretty much guaranteed. All these things is what makes this set one of the best sets in the game right now. Hunter's Fate seems to be having some sort of identity crisis with itself. As far as I understand, this set is supposedly meant to be used with a sniper weapon. But everything about this set, it works better with any other weapon class in the game, except for maybe shotguns. The 2-piece bonus is 20% optimal range, the 3-piece bonus is 20% more headshot damage, and the 4-piece has now changed a bit to a group buff where for every bullet you hit, your whole squad will be protected for that one bullet. Now, here's the thing that I'm on about with the 4-piece bonus. Because it shields your team per bullet that you hit, I can really see myself sitting very far back with an electronics build, so to speak, on my Hunter's Fate. And then I can just grab an LMG with 100, maybe 200 bullets per magazine and start wailing away at any target that I can find. It doesn't really matter what my damage is, all I have to care about is hitting a target from a distance. Because of this, I can be the dedicated healer while also protecting them with the shields. In a lot of Dark Zone situations, I can even try to look for some NPCs in the distance that are maybe easier to hit than enemy players and provide really good damage mitigation to the team through those bullets landed. So because of all of this, I do not think that this 4-piece is bad, I think it's actually pretty strong. However, I do believe that this set is going to be played so different from the intended way. Lonestar has almost had no change whatsoever. I didn't think this set was anything special in 1.3 and I still believe that that is the case. The 100% bonus ammo on the 2-piece is a quality of life feature more than anything, and I do not really recommend taking this by itself. The 3-piece bonus is quite nice, especially if you're also taking the 4-piece, because the 4-piece still does the same thing. If you switch weapons, the weapon is automatically reloaded, which can be quite helpful, especially on LMGs and shotguns, which tend to have a higher reload time. And then if you're going for the 4-piece, the 2-piece isn't actually that bad either, because it means that you can run with 2 identical shotguns and still have plenty of ammo. What I do think Lonestar is missing though, and the reason why I wouldn't really take it, is simply because of the numbers. The whole idea with Lonestar is having a lot of sustained damage, never having to reload and just being able to swap weapons and keep on shooting. But in PvP, you usually have to take the time to heal up between magazines anyway, or you have to run away or run after someone that's trying to get away, and then you cannot always be firing your weapon because it will slow you down. Now, when you're healing up or when you're running after someone, that's usually the time where you can reload, making the whole 4-piece kind of unnecessary. On the other hand, Lonestar doesn't provide that burst that is required to win 1v1s or to flank someone and quickly burst someone down. And when it comes down to sustained damage, I think Predator's Mark straight up beats Lonestar because of the damage over time it provides with the bleed. Lonestar seems to be a set filled with quality of life features for PvE players, but doesn't bring the real punch to the table in PvP when needed. FireCrest is a set that probably received the biggest overhaul of any set in the game. You now get 3 extra fire grenades on the 2-piece, your flame turret gets 50% more range and 30% more damage on the 3-piece, and for the 4-piece the player's damage is increased by 15% at targets that are on fire. The new FireCrest, it was a little bit difficult to rate for me, simply because it is so different than every other set in the game. For most sets it is optimal to only have 1 or 2 people run with it per squad. For example, you do not need 2 sentries, you do not need 2 tacticians, you do not need 2 predators, and you do not need 2 people running with Hunter's Fate. All that you're really going to achieve in most cases is overlaps that you will not really benefit much from. However, with FireCrest it's the exact opposite. This set gets better the more people have it. When you are alone, it's quite difficult to set players on fire. Yes, you have a little more grenades, yes, you have a large turret, but the uptime of enemies actually being on fire will still be relatively low. Thus, I don't think you will be getting much value out of your 4-piece where you do 15% extra damage to targets that are on fire. However, if, let's say, 3 people are running with FireCrest, then suddenly you will be able to benefit from your 4-piece bonus around 3 times as much, because enemies will be put on fire around 3 times as much. And on top of that, your teammates will also be able to benefit from the fire effects that you apply, making the set that much more powerful. So, I can see FireCrest being a top tier set, but only within the right team that has the right setup for it. I do not believe it is the optimal set for solo players. DeadEye is a set that could potentially be really strong with this patch. The developers changed the way that headshots multiply with critical hits, so losing headshot damage from your marksman rifle isn't all that bad anymore. And also, it's a lot harder to get to that 60% critical hit chance right now. So having a 100% critical hit chance and speccing fully into critical hit damage, that will surely increase your overall damage output, especially in PvP where it is very hard to hit the head. The 2-piece bonus is 40% initial bullet stability, which allows you to kinda 2-tap, so to speak. Hit 2 bullets right after another without losing much control over the weapon. The 3-piece bonus gives you 20% more critical hit damage, but only if you're playing with a marksman rifle, and the 4-piece now actually works the exact other way around. You can get that 100% critical hit chance, but only if you're zoomed in. To be honest, I do not really like this change. I think it should just give you the 100% critical hit chance when you shoulder your weapon, because having it apply only when zoomed in comes with a lot of drawbacks and annoyances. For example, when looking through a high-powered scope, you can't really see your reticle. It's gonna be hard to tell whether you're actually going to be hitting an enemy or not after you've already fired 5 or 6 shots. You can of course avoid this by not having a high-powered scope to begin with, but then again, you're using a sniper, and you might miss out on some of the attributes that high-powered scopes roll with. Not only that, but even when zooming in with, let's say, a red dot sight, the game automatically lowers your aim speed by quite a lot actually, which I think is really annoying if the enemies are even somewhat closer to you. Because of all of this, I think that while this set remains very strong on paper, I think this will fall out of the meta really fast because it will simply be too gimmicky to use in real scenarios. Reclaimer is another set that I feel like will fall out of the meta really fast. The 2-piece gives 50% increased duration for consumables, the 3-piece gives you 50% more duration to the support station, and the 4-piece that still works in the same way, but it will also put the consumable of your teammate on cooldown, so you cannot utilize multiple Reclaimer sets to get more than one consumable active at the same time. The 2-piece is actually something that I still really like, although this could use some small number buffs in my opinion. For example, increase the duration by 75% instead of 50%. That's a good way to start. Because I really think that it is a nice idea to be able to pick up this 2-piece and build it with another set. To be able to utilize the longer duration of those consumables and maybe counter FireCrest or Predator's Mark by simply eating an energy bar. I think in those situations the 2-piece is really gonna shine. I can also come up with a few more, for example the reduced cooldowns that you get with a soda. That would be very helpful for a healer, or maybe the increased healing received on a canned food. That would be very nice for a tank player. But I still do not believe that people will pick up this 2-piece over a lot of other things simply because the consumables are still so limited. That is the major drawback of equipping a 2-piece like this and relying on it a lot. I think that if the developers want people to start utilizing consumables a bit more, they should just give you 6 charges of consumables with every restock and then let the player decide which ones he wants to use. So you can use, for example, explosive ammo 6 times, or you can use the soda 6 times, but after using 6 consumables, you are out and you're going to have to restock. With the changes to the fire and explosive ammo, I think that this isn't unreasonable at all, and players would be able to rely a lot more on a build that utilizes those consumables a bit more. I also really see no use for the Reclaimer 4-piece. It only allows you to use consumables more often because it doesn't actually consume it. But it also puts the consumables of your teammates on cooldown, which I think really hurts the set a lot. If you want to rely on consumables, more often than not you're going to need something else than your teammates. Since explosive ammo and fire ammo got changed, I think people will be more eager to try out reduced cooldowns or increased healing for different builds. I still think there will be situations, especially in PvE, where Reclaimer proves to be powerful, for example with the water. But at the end of the day, if consumables are really needed, then everybody can just manually activate their own without the Reclaimer. And now you have an enhanced version of the 4-piece bonus where everybody gets to choose what he wants, when he wants. I'm not saying that the Reclaimer is a bad set per se, but with so many other, much stronger options and only 4 players per squad, I really don't see where this set fits in right now. And then we get to one of the last ones on the list, we have AlphaBridge. The one thing that I never really liked about the AlphaBridge is the increased health regeneration, because this is a bonus that only applies when you're out of combat. And this game is all about combat. Why would you ever want a bonus that doesn't apply in combat? I can definitely see some possible synergy between the Nomad 3-piece and then this, where the Nomad heals you past those 3 health segments, and then the AlphaBridge takes over to quickly top you off. However, I simply do not think it's worth picking this up over any other 2-piece in the game right now. The 3-piece is very similar to the Lonestar and Predator's Mark 3-piece, but instead of being weapon specific, it's a little more flexible and gives you a flat 5% damage on whatever gun you happen to be using. That of course works very well with the 4-piece, as this 4-piece bonus is all about trying different combinations of weapons and weapon talents to get the maximum damage or maximum utility. And I really feel like that this set is in a very good spot right now, despite the 2-piece being quite underwhelming. And then last up on this long list of gear sets is the Blind set, which has been reworked and renamed to the Banshee set, a set that is primarily focused towards the Dark Zone. The 2-piece gives you 20% more Dark Zone currency on your drops, the 3-piece gives you a flat 10% damage to enemies out of cover, and the 4-piece actually changes depending on whether you are a rogue or not. If you are rogue, your ammo is completely refilled every 30 seconds and damage taken from non-rogue players is reduced by 10%. But then if you're not rogue, the damage that you do to rogues is increased by 10% and you will also not lose any Dark Zone experience or currency when you die. This set provides a good amount of fairly unconditional damage to other players and can be quite helpful and quite good in PvP. However, I do not really believe that it is as strong or as overpowered as many people make it out to be. First up, for starters, the numbers just don't add up. It just doesn't do as much damage as something like the AlphaBridge or the Predator's Mark. Both of those sets also have flat percentage-based bonus damage, but their 4-piece can dish out well over 10% extra damage to a player. And especially with the AlphaBridge, that's for the most part also really unconditional, given that of course you have the right talents for your weapons. Other than that, the Banshee set doesn't really do a whole lot for you outside of the Dark Zone, or even versus the NPCs inside of the Dark Zone. Now, I do know that when you're playing with this set, your goal is most likely to play PvP, so the performance outside of the Dark Zone, that should not be too big of a factor. But considering that as a fact, you are still stuck with a 2-piece that increases your item find. And I think item find bonuses, they're not really a very good thing for an endgame gear set, especially one that is focused around PvP. For these reasons, I think that this set is not bad at all. I think this set is pretty good, but it isn't quite on the same level as the other 2 top tier gear sets in the game. And that's gonna be it for my thoughts on the gear set. That's gonna be it for the tier list. So as you can see, the question of what to farm in 1.4 isn't really that easy to answer. If you want to be safe, if you want to have a good set, and if you want to be able to do a little bit of everything, then Predator's Mark and AlphaBridge are definitely the way to go. But what you shouldn't forget is that most of these gear sets, even if they're not tier 1 or not tier 2, they can still be good options under the right circumstances. A gear set being tier 2 or tier 3, that doesn't render them useless or bad. It mostly means that their use is more situational, or the gear sets are harder to get value out of in real scenarios. Now, hopefully this video helped you out a lot. When the 1.4 patch comes out, I will also be releasing my best in slot guide, so you kind of know what to roll and which items. And you can see how I would roll my attributes on my gear. But that video is still gonna take a while, so until then, I will see you guys later, or like they say, in the Netherlands. See you later!